Texas is way bigger than Scotland. So.
Yeah, exactly. If Scotland can have regions, I think we can too, right?
And it is warm here. I mean, don't get me wrong. It still gets high temperature.
Hey everybody, we're here at Ironroot Republic, checking out their distillery today, and we're here with Robert Likarish.
How's it going, everybody?
Doing a little VIP tour. So, show us around.
Yeah, sure. So the production floor is pretty small. We're in about 4,000 square foot up here. We're set up for a little party tonight, so everything's a little bit more roped off than it would normally be. But we'll take you and show you around a little bit.
All right.
So everything that we're going to do stemmed, except for the brandies, because we got to use grapes, so we're not going to cook any grapes. But for all of our whiskey products or vodka, gin, that's all going to start in our mash tun, which is right over here. I mean, as you know, a whiskey starts off, we got full of a lot of carbohydrates, so we got to break it down to the simple sugars. So we're going to basically boil our grains. So with corn, we're going to cook it at 212 degrees. With wheat and rye, about 160 is kind of what we prefer. Barley, we'll keep it around 152.
Okay.
And that has to do with the gelatinization of the different grains, the temperatures that you need for that.
And you extract the ideal amount of sugar and starch from different temperatures with different grains. Does that have anything to do with that?
Well, you won't, if you overdo, like so with barley, you want to preserve the enzyme character, and if you cook it at too high, the enzymes will break down.
I see. Okay.
With corn, just because corn is much harder to kind of break down than the other ones, it has much higher that gelatinization temperature to break down those carbohydrates. That's why it has to be cooked so high. So with corn, we'll actually won't add in any enzymes or the barley until it starts on its cooling down process.
I see. So you do each type of grain separately?
Yeah, it's going to be kind of a step. So with our corn whiskeys that are 100% corn, we're just going to cook it at boiling and then crash cool it down to room temperature as quickly as possible. With our whiskeys, they're going to have like rye or wheat or any of those in them. If it's corn, we'll cook the corn at a higher temperature, and then we'll step it down to a lower temperature, add in the other grain, hold it there, cook it, and then drop it down to room temperature.
I see. So you add it progressively. I see.
Right.
Very cool.
Yeah, and that's just to preserve characteristics. Again, if you boil some of the stuff, you're going to get a lot more of the tannin out of some of the husks and stuff like that aren't quite as pleasant.
Gotcha. And you guys use a lot of heirloom, unique corn varieties, right?
Yeah, we've actually just got through this week ordering this year's experimental. Jonathan and I like to joke that I'm more of the brake and he's the gas on this part of the distillery. He loves experimenting. He's got a little bit of ADD in him, so he's always wanting to try new corns. And my mother doesn't help the process because she's always bringing in the seed book or calling up a new farmer, going, "Hey, guess what corns I found? Look, this is so cool." And then my brother immediately wants to distill it. So I try to restrict him down to about 5 or 6 experiments a year. This year we just finished ordering this stuff for this year, which I'm really excited about.
Nice.
There's some corns we haven't dealt with before, but right now, I think we have like 12 to 14 different experimental whiskeys in back right now.
Wow.
Fun. So
that many?
Yeah, so we do quite a bit of experiments. Again, we'll get to taste through some of those. They're just now turning 2 years old this year. So they're really starting to show what they're going to do, so we're pretty excited.
Yeah, very cool. That's really interesting. I think it's something that a lot of people don't think about that are whiskey consumers is trying to find unique types of grain in from craft distilleries like you guys, having that interest in the agriculture. Right? Yeah,
and it's been great for us because we've gotten to really tie into the local agriculture here, working with a lot of farmer groups in the area. And we do a lot of work with them. But one of the coolest things, like for us, it comes from because Jonathan and I come from the brandy distilling world. That's where a lot of our training came from. It's a lot of how we approach everything. And when you look at making wines, different wines are made with different grapes. And so for us, it was like, well, no one's ever really looked at these. People had just started really looking at the different corns. You have Balcones working with blue corn down in Waco. And it was something that just really was eye-opening to us. And we're like, there's thousands of varieties of corn. Why don't we see what they have to offer, see what cool flavors we can get? Because, it turns out that just like the grapes, different corns taste very different from each other.
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
So it's a lot of fun. So.
Very cool. Okay, let's...
Yeah, so next, so after fermentation, after mashing, we move to fermentation. So you can feel, got a little bit of the it's going to be distilled this next week.
Oh yeah, that's warm, and that's is Is that mostly from the yeast itself? Or?
Yes, so when the yeast is making the alcohol, it's actually an exothermic reaction.
Right.
So it actually is going to heat up the fermenter a little bit. Now, Jonathan and I like a little bit higher temperature fermentation. A lot of places keep it really cool, like 72 to 80 degree fermentations. Jonathan and I like a little bit warmer. It stresses the yeast out just a little bit, so you get it to start creating some really kind of some of the funkier flavor, especially when we start playing with stuff like some old school rum yeast or single malt yeast. At a little bit higher temperature, you can get some really cool flavors, which we'll talk about when we get to the barrel room. But
that's awesome.
So we call it, with some of our fermentations, we could call them the hot and dirty fermentations. So you get a lot more fusels, a lot more organic acids are going to be created, which are going to turn into some of the really cool fruity and different characters.
Yeah, it just adds complexity. Sure.
Exactly. So, and that's again, that's also why we do a little bit longer fermentation too. So most of the alcohol is going to be produced in the first 48 to 60 hours. After that, because we go a full 7 days for fermentation, so we have some of the cooler stuff starts happening after the alcohol production subsides.
I see. Interesting.
We wanted it to be that, like, we wanted that when you're walking up, that you're looking in and you see everything. And it's funny, we get asked all the time, so you guys actually use this? And we're like, oh yeah, these would be really expensive set pieces, I think.
Right. You're right. Yeah. No, we actually do use these.
Yeah.
It's a lot of copper to not use it.
Yes, so this is our pride and joy of the distillery. This is our guy that gets used the most. It's a traditional Scottish style pot still that we lovingly call Jim Bowie, and that's because he was born in Kentucky and hopefully he's going to die in Texas, or he came from Kentucky.
I see. Okay.
So again, we have a little bit of a dark humor around the distillery, so you might know, so we have a little bit more foreboding names for the whiskeys generally.
That's true, you do.
So that's our kind of fun joke. So this guy was actually made by Vendome Copper and Brass, the same people that make stills for Jack Daniels, Jim Beam, all those guys.
Right.
But generally they're making the big continuous column stills. For us, they got a chance to make an old school pot still and they jumped at it. So we got to work with their master coppersmith over there. And so it was funny, he wouldn't let any of the other coppersmiths work on this one. So this was hand hammered by him, especially like the onion and everything else. So
that's incredible.
It's a work of art, and I tell you what, it makes some really beautiful whiskeys. So how this guy's designed, so Jonathan and I like a little bit, we were looking at scotches when we were looking at designs of stills.
Sure.
To kind of get an idea of what type of flavors we could look for and what we would see off of different shapes and styles. We knew we wanted to make bourbon, which bourbon's a little bit bigger, bolder whiskey. So that's why we actually took the look at the top of the still. And that's a pretty sharp downward angle off the top of the still.
Sure.
It's kind of like you would see in stills that are going to produce much heavier spirit over in Scotland. So
right, if the angle was less, you'd get more reflux.
you get more reflux that would come back in the pot.
Right.
With this guy, if it makes it at the top, it's coming out.
It's gone, yeah.
You're going to get really viscous, thick whiskey that's going to come off of this still. That's why you're going to notice that there's a lot of mouthfeel in our whiskeys.
Yeah, there absolutely is, and that's something I think that is really interesting. The shape and size of the still and how the angle of the arm and all that stuff can make a tremendous difference in the final product.
Oh,
yeah, that's incredible. So everything just kind of gets loaded in there, and you.
So yeah, we practice a traditional double distillation method, and it's what you're going to see in most of Scotland and then in Cognac in France. So
okay.
The first distillation is called the low wines run. So basically our goal is just to get all the alcohol out of it, because we do a grain in fermentation when it comes to the bourbons. So all the grain and everything gets loaded into this still.
Sure, as opposed to it being filtered beforehand.
Exactly.
Right.
Or if you're making a single malt, you would filter through the bed, and so you'd only end up with a wort rather than everything with all the grain and husks and everything still in it.
Right.
So it'll take generally about 12 hours for us to do our low wines run, which is a very slow low wines run, which we kind of enjoy because, again, it allows us to really see kind of what that spirit's going to be like after the second run. So the first run, we'll collect it all in a big tank. We'll take all the grains, we give those to local ranchers to feed the cattle, spray out the inside of this guy, and then we load it back up with those low wines, and we're going to start the second distillation, the spirit run. So the spirit run will take about 14 hours. It's a little bit longer run, and that's because we're just going to heat it up really slowly.
Okay.
We do, again, in working with and talking with some of the guys over at Glengoyne, they really talk about having a slow speed off the still is really important for getting separation. So for us, we have a very, very slow slow heating up process for this particular still once we
Sure.
get into the cut range.
Okay. And when it comes off the still, what's the proof generally?
So for us, after you collect all the heart section, generally we're going to be about 138 to 141,
Okay.
just depending on what we're making.
Right.
So
Varies by the product.
yeah, and the time of year too will actually vary a little bit. That's kind of one thing people don't talk a whole lot about when running still, especially a traditional pot still like this. That the ambient temperature in this room, the barometric pressures are going to shift kind of where your boiling points are, and actually how fast the fans are running will determine how much reflux we're getting off the column. on this
Really?
guy. So during different times of year, the spirit that's coming off the still actually will vary a little bit as far as what the type of cuts we're making, as well as kind of how oily or how clean the spirit is coming off the still.
It seems like almost, distilling, I think of it at least as being a lot of science, but also an art at the same time. And
Oh, yeah.
it seems like being able to mentally control and accommodate all those parameters, that's part of the art of it, right?
Well,
It just
yeah.
comes with experience.
That's why basically every day our best tools are going to be our nose and our taste buds. So
Right.
if you look over where our spirit safe is, there's a little spout right there where that's where we'll pull samples as we're getting into the cuts, and we'll be making the decisions based off smell and taste. Like in this valley right here, we're actually a little bit more humid because of Lake Texoma. That's the biggest lake in the state, just right over here. So it really impacts the weather patterns around here, just because there is so much water right there. And so for us, it's a little bit more moderate than what you're going to see down in Austin and Houston. We don't get quite as hot. Again, we get snow every once in a while. Generally, every other year or so, you'll see snow. So
Like last weekend.
yeah, last weekend we had a little
really?
snow up here.
Oh, no.
So it is quite a bit more moderate. The other thing we get is because we're so close to Oklahoma, all those raging storms that just kind of push through and shift barometric pressures drastically, they hit us really hard too. And we can actually tell when fronts are coming because the barrels will actually weep a little bit in back, the ones that have little pinholes.
Amazing.
And
Okay.
so we can actually walk back there and I'm going to be like, oh, with pressures are shifting right now, because you can actually see the whiskey will actually start leaking a little bit out of a barrel.
Sir,
But our philosophy, again, it's kind of beat into us kind of from the French brandy background, is to slow down. Our goal is not to produce whiskey super fast, where a lot of guys are like, how can I get this whiskey out as quickly as I can to market?
Right.
That's a smart business move. I wouldn't say that's what we did. We're the opposite of that. So our goal in the 4 years that we've been open is how do we find ways to slow things down, to let the whiskey take more time to do what we want it to do. Because we firmly believe that oxidation is one of the most important parts of the whiskey aging process.
Right.
Extraction's easy to get. You can get extraction all day long. Especially here in Texas, we get it very quickly. I mean, you can see our whiskeys are really dark. That's why if you look at almost all of our barrels in back are 53 gallons or 63 gallons. We actually have moved up to a bigger size of barrel primarily over this last year because we're trying to slow down extraction. We want to slow the angel share down a little bit and allow our whiskey to age up because we want 6-year-old, we want 7-year-old, we want 8-year-old whiskeys.
Right.
In order to get that in a way that to me is still palatable, you have to do things a little bit differently. And so I think our goal is figuring out, because whiskey making is only 10 years old here in Texas. So
Exactly.
it's been a work of how do we figure out the best way to make whiskey in Texas, to make bourbon in Texas, to make single malt here. What are the best strategies for doing that? And so for us, we've looked a little bit more to the French model of how they deal with barrels, which again, we'll talk about that in the back a little bit. But it's, again, you get some of these big, bold whiskeys, but you can have big, bold whiskeys, but if you can push it and have a 4-year-old, a 6-year-old, there's some really magical things that can happen when you start doing that as well. So
Right, yeah, a lot gets said about the climate in Texas, and then some distilleries using 5-gallon barrels, things like that. And like you said, you can extract a lot of wood flavor from that really, really quickly. But does that ultimately make a better whiskey versus you guys' approach?
and it's one of those things that everyone's going to have the different palate and different preferences on that. A lot of the Texas, our compatriots here in Texas, the whiskey markets, they like to give us hard. They say we're more wood averse than our friends at Balcones, or especially than Garrison. And so, and I think that's very true. That again, coming from that brandy world, where again our goal is to slow things down and
Right.
take our time. And that's, again, why we started out primarily with 53-gallon barrels. We did do a couple 25s, but it's mainly for experimental purposes, so we'll taste one of those experiments when we go back there. But there's really only 2 small barrels that we have in the distillery that we play around with.
So unlike a lot of other folks, they start with small barrels and they might eventually start aging in larger barrels and take more time. You've been doing that pretty much the whole time.
Yeah, we started out with 53s for all of our production whiskeys are in 53s. And as I said, over the last 18 months, we've slowly started moving to 63-gallon barrels. We've got a barrel back there that's even bigger than that. So we're really playing around what is the best size barrel for us to be aging in, and what's the best level chars and everything else like that. And that's something that we've taken a lot of time with to try to figure out what we think works best for us here in this area.
Absolutely.
The other thing that sets us apart too is our ability to get the local grain, and because we're close to the Red River, our soil is not the same. So when our corn's grown over here in Sadler, Texas, which is about 10 minutes from here, it is not going to taste the same because you have to remember terroir. Terroir is the soil, the climate, and of course the people who make it.
I should be totally turning this camera around for this.
And does Mom want this whiskey? Mom, what you want me to
Yeah, absolutely.
Tell them your definition of terroir.
Terroir. Robert and I just got back from Cognac, and so we've talked a lot about terroir because of our relationship to Cognac, because of TV Munson, and I'm sure you've heard the story and the relationship. And Rob, if not, will tell you the story better than I can do it. But when we were there, we went around and we talked to and we're talking 4 and 5 generations of okay.
Or leave it in because
It's always your father. So they let me just flip it off.
Yeah, he'll call you back.
He'll call me back in 2 minutes. So when we were there, we would go to the different distilleries, and I would say, "What's your definition to terroir?" And it is always consistent. It is the soil that your plant's grown from, because whatever your ground is, that's why Texas whiskey is not going to taste like Kentucky whiskey. It's not going to taste like Idaho whiskey or whatever, but it's going to taste like Texas whiskey.
Right.
And so terroir, the ground, the climate, and then the person who makes it. So you're going to have your philosophy and how you approach.
Yeah, it's going to inform every step of the process. It's going to end up tasting like where it came from.
As I said, normally when people come up, it's a 4-hour adventure.
Yeah, and when you go back there, when he says...
That's when I was like, what time does he need to leave? Okay, we got to start early.
So when you go
good
back
advice.
into the barrel room, you're going to see a Danica barrel. And the Danica barrel is barrel number 1. So you're going to see, not only did we say we're doing the 53-gallon, she's sitting there. And she was named Danica because that's Jonathan's daughter's name. And we laid down our first barrel on her 3rd birthday. So it's August 18th of 2014. And so you will see our first barrel, the Danica barrel, and so it's still sitting back there.
Still got whiskey in it.
And it's still got whiskey in it.
Very cool.
And we're not ready to release it.
No?
Let's go take a look.
Yeah.
Tell me.
We're
That woman will run our distillery. Trust me. She's in preschool, and at 4 they say, well, what are you going to do when you grow up? Everybody's going to be firemen, not Danica. She's going to manage the barrel room.
Oh, wow, okay.
In fact, if you go to Jonathan's office, there's actually, now that she's 7, she was back there with a piece of paper,
mapping
and
out
she was mapping out the barrels so she will know where they are.
Oh, that's amazing.